A very good evening to all of you and a very warm welcome. This is Sumedha Bhattacharya, and I'll be leading you through the slides for Indian economy and policy. I'm looking forward to this live session, and I hope I am able to meet your expectations and clear your doubts. Because of the time constraint, I may not be able to clear all the doubts, but I'll still try my level best so as to address all the doubts that you have in your mind while going through the text material that you have. So I've done my master's in economics, and I teach in the capacity of visiting faculty in various colleges in Pune. So let us just start with Indian economy and policy. So in this live session, we'll be covering the first 6 modules. So here we are going to cover agriculture, industry, then the structure of Indian economy. Then we're going to cover population, that is an important aspect of our Indian economy. So let's just get going. So shall I start? Can you all hear me? Am I audible to all?
Yes, yes.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, audible.
All right, sir. Another request, if you could all keep your videos off, and whenever you want to speak or you have any doubt, then once I'm done with one module, I'll ask for the doubts, and that is the time you can raise your doubts and I'll clear it and then move to the second module. So that is how I plan to go ahead with it. So let us start with first is, what are the features of Indian economy? So one is, first we need to know the first module that we have is colonialism and Indian economy. So the kind of Indian economy that we have today, it has got a lot to do with the policies that were adopted by the Britishers. And for that, in order to make a comparison of India before British rule and India after British rule, we'll get to know how disruptive the policies of Britishers were. So in order to have a look at what were the characteristics of Indian economy before the colonial period. So let us have a look at the features. So first is, there was subsistence farming. So the kind of agricultural system that we had it was more of subsistence nature. When I say subsistence, it means that agriculture was undertaken for meeting the requirements of the producers themselves. And the main purpose behind agriculture was not to generate a marketable surplus and sell it in the market for a revenue. The only purpose of production was for self-consumption. At the most, there was internal trade, where they were traded with the craftsmen who were not into production of agricultural goods or food grains. So in terms of the nature of agriculture that was undertaken, it was basically of subsistence type and not commercial type. Second is caste system. We had a caste system where it was on the basis of specialization that the people would take up their occupation, although it became distorted later on. But the basic idea behind caste system was based on division of labor. That is, every individual chooses his or her occupation on the basis of skills possessed by them. Third is, India had a very prominent position in international trade, and it enjoyed surplus BOT. So if we have a look at the kind of goods that were exported, it was quite sophisticated for that time. So we were into metallurgy also, we were into export of textiles also, we were into export of raw silk, cotton, opium, rice, sugar, drugs, and even precious stones. And there was a huge demand for the Indian products, and we enjoyed a surplus balance of trade. Now, balance of trade means the excess of export receipts over import payments. So because of heavy demand for the Indian goods in the international market, we had a huge export receipt, and that is why we enjoyed a surplus balance of trade. Last is, we were very well known for our handicraft industries, and it is said that even in Egypt, the mummies were wrapped with the muslin cloth that was produced in India. So it was very well known for the handicraft industries, and this industrial sector in India was flourishing because of the demand it had in the international as well as in the domestic market. Now let us see what were the features, what were the policies that were adopted by the Britishers which led to systematic destruction of the Indian economy. So first, let us take the primary sector, that is agriculture. So in agriculture, the land revenue system was adopted by the Britishers. So this was to facilitate revenue collection. So under this, the ownership of land was taken away from the farmers and it was bestowed to this class of people who were called the zamindars. So zamindars had the ownership, but it were not the actual tillers of land. So that is why obviously they did not have any interest in increasing the productivity of land. All they were interested was in extraction of revenue. So that is why the productivity in agriculture was very low. Second important aspect is commercialization of agriculture. So as I said that there was a significant shift, what we see is from subsistence farming that is meant for self-consumption to commercialization of agriculture. So agriculture was now meant to produce a surplus, a marketable surplus, and there was a drift from production of food grains or food crops to cash crops. So now it was not rice and wheat that was being produced, but it was production of indigo and jute and tobacco. And that is said to be one of the reasons that caused the Bengal and Odisha famine. Now, why commercialization of agriculture picked up was because of the colonial rule. Now, because they in Great Britain, industrial revolution was taking place around the same time, so they wanted more and more raw materials for running their factories, and India was a cheap source of raw material for them. So that is why there was commercialization taking place at a very fast pace in our country. Second is with development of transportation and railways in India, they were able to extract raw materials from every nook and corner of the country. And third is with the opening of Suez Canal, since the cost of transportation went down as the distance between Great Britain and India was reduced. So that is why they now wanted to make use of this fall in transportation cost and get the maximum out of it. So that also led to commercialization of agriculture in our country. So that's about agriculture. And because of agriculture commercialization, as I said, there was scarcity of food grains in our country. When we look at industries, there was systematic destruction of Indian handicrafts with the various policies that were adopted by the Britishers. So they imposed heavy export duties on the Indian handicrafts such that they became very costly in the international market, and that is why there was loss in demand for these. Second is these Indian handicraft producers, they were supported by the princely states. Now, since the princely states, their ownership itself was at stake, therefore, now there were not many supporters for Indian handicrafts. So these people who were involved in Indian handicrafts, they were rendered unemployed and they added to the pool of unemployed labor in agriculture. So that means there was more burden on agriculture because of destruction of Indian handicrafts. Second is there was no incentive for the Britishers to invest in capital goods industries. So that is why capital goods industries are those which facilitate the production of further goods. So your machines, then iron and steel, all these come under capital goods industries. So there was lack of capital goods industries, and that is why when the Britishers left India, we were completely, especially with respect to industrial sector, our growth was not just nil, but it was negative. Third is trade. There was complete reversal of trade composition. Now, when we talk of the development of an economy, that an economy is considered to be developed if it is into export of finished goods and import of raw materials. And this was the case when we were in the pre-colonial era. But because of the British policies, now we became an exporter of primary goods and an importer of finished goods. So that means there was complete reversal of trade composition. Last is there was drain of wealth. Now this concept or this term was coined by Dadabhai Naoroji. Now the drain of wealth means that, as I said in the previous slide, we saw that there was an increase in balance of trade surplus. That means our exports were more and our imports were less, leading to a generation of surplus. Now, this surplus was not used by the Britishers for the development of our country, but it was used by them for financing their wars, for making payments to their British employees in India or Indian employees who were employed by the Britishers, and for meeting their own administrative expenses. So this led to complete drainage of wealth from our country. So we are done with Indian economy during colonization period. Any doubts so far? Is there any doubt?
No, ma'am.
No, ma'am.
Okay, all right. So before proceeding to the second module, ma'am, can we have the first poll, please? Ashna, ma'am? Yeah, thank you. So the poll has been launched. Kindly answer this question as per what you have understood in the discussion that we've had so far. Okay, I think we are done. So 42% of people have answered that one of the major transformations was switching from food crop to cash crop, which is absolutely right. It is not introduction to subsistence farming because we were already practicing subsistence farming and there was no technological advancement during British rule. Whatever least was done by them was just for their own convenience. So the answer is the third option, that is switch from food crops to cash crop production. Ma'am, how do I remove this? It's not yet gone. Ashna, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am. Can you just repeat what happened?
No, ma'am. Let me just give it a try because of, okay. Yeah, I've got it.
Okay.
Yes, ma'am. Now moving to the next module is structure of Indian economy. So the structure of Indian economy, here we are going to have a look at the various characteristics of Indian economy. So one major characteristic feature of Indian economy is that it is a mixed economy. Mixed economy means there is coexistence of both public sector and private sector. Now, public sector means those enterprises which are primarily owned wholly or partly by the government. That means government will have more than 51% or more stake in these companies. So those are called the public sector enterprises. So in a mixed economy, there is coexistence of public sector and private sector. Now, one important landmark here in the Indian economic history is that of 1991, when the liberalization, privatization, and globalization took place. So before 1991, we were a mixed economy with more of socialistic pattern of society. That means there was over-dominance of the government or the public sector, and the role of the private sector was very limited with regards to its economic activities. While after 1991, we have moved more towards capitalist pattern of economy, where it is the market forces that determine the demand and determine the price of goods, as against there were price controls before 1991 reforms. So that is mixed economy. So the kind of mixed economy that we have right now is that in most of the sectors, private sector is given, or the private producers are given the freedom to choose what they want to produce, how they want to produce it, the quantity, the fixation of price. But whenever the government feels that the public welfare is at stake, that is where the government interferes. Second is India is a developing economy. Now, this category of whether an economy is developed or developing or underdeveloped, it is determined on the basis of the per capita income. Now, what is this per capita income or national income? That is, we'll see in the forthcoming slides. As of now, we'll just do that developing economy means which has a per capita income which is between you take it like for lower income, the lower income countries, it is less than 1,036, and for the middle income countries, it is between 1,036 to $12,535 per capita. So India is in the developing, and in that too, it is a lower middle income country with a per capita income by 2021 data. It is $1,920. So that is the per capita income. That is the average income per person. That is what makes us a developing economy. Along with that, we are in the early stage of industrialization. Industrialization is now picking up, but it is still at its early stage where we are more into production of consumer goods, but we are now trying to diversify by attracting more capital and infusing better technology in production. So this gets us to the third point, that is lack of industrialization. So as I said, now what reflects the lack of industrialization is that the contribution of industrialization to the gross domestic product is around I think it is around 29%, while when it comes to employment, it generates employment opportunities to only 18%. So that means it has a low share in employment also, as well as in GDP also. Fourth is that there is lack of capital formation in our country. Capital formation is where there is a lot of reinvestment of capital happening, the expansion of production activities, where we are generating more. So whenever there is a profit earned by the producers, they reinvest it in the production process. They may diversify their production, or they may intensify their production, which leads to further expansion, more profit, and more expansion of production. So this is called capital formation. Now, since in India, the production itself is less and the income generated is low, there is lesser saving at the individual level. Since there is lesser saving, the amount of capital formation that takes place on the basis of savings is also low. And that is why we're trying to attract more and more foreign direct investments, so that we can get that support from the rest of the world sector. Next is economic disparity. There is unequal distribution of wealth and income in our country, such that 1% of the population, if we divide the entire population into different sections on the basis of their income level, then the top 1%, they own 80% of the country's resources. So that stark is the economic disparity. And this is one of the reasons why India is a developing economy. That is, the advantages of growth are not enjoyed by everybody, but it is just enjoyed by a handful of people. The unemployment rate in our country is also very high. And because of the COVID, the unemployment rate, which was almost 7% to 8%, it has gone up to 12% in our country. That means a major chunk of labor force who are willing to work, even at the existing wage rate, they fail to get a job. So this shows our failure in generation of jobs in our country. Last is over-dependence on agriculture. More than 60% of the population is directly or indirectly dependent on agriculture for its livelihood. And still, its contribution to GDP, so far it was 17.8%. And as per the latest data, it has gone for the first time to 20%. So that means we can see the mismatch, 60% of the population being engaged in agriculture, and the contribution to the GDP, which has now reached a peak. Looking at the Indian conditions, it has now reached 20%. So this is all about the features of Indian economy. Moving to the next slide. Now, when we say that we are evaluating the countries or making comparison between the countries, the measuring rod is national income. Now, when we say national income, if we get into the details, it is actually net national product at factor cost. So if we break the entire concept, so overall, I'll first tell you the meaning of national income. So national income refers to the money value of all the final goods and services that have been produced by the normal residents of the country during an accounting year. So we need to look at every aspect of this definition that I just stated. So another thing is that when we come across all these news articles about economic growth and about the Indian economy, we come across national income also, and we come across GDP also. So national income is net national product at factor cost, while GDP is gross domestic product. So as we can see that these are the two terms. So we have got GDP and we've got net national product. So let's make a comparison term-wise. So the first term for GDP is gross, while that for net national product is net. So that means when we want to evaluate the performance of a country, either we can see what is the total expenditure on increasing the productive capacity of the economy. That means how much has been the total consumption expenditure, also how much has been the total investment expenditure, also government expenditure, also expenditure of the rest of the world sector on domestically produced. All these expenditures together reflect the performance of the economy. Now, when we say the expenditure of the investment expenditure, there are two kinds of expenditures being incurred by the producers. One is expenditure incurred on freshly acquired assets. Say, suppose I, as a producer, if I'm purchasing a new machinery, it is adding to my productive capacity. Secondly, I could be incurring an expenditure for the maintenance of my existing fixed assets. Now, this expenditure is just on the maintenance of fixed assets and it is actually not adding to my productive capacity. So when I say the total expenditure on fixed assets, I'm looking at the gross concept where I'm taking into account the expenditure on fixed assets which are newly acquired, as well as the expenditure on the existing assets. So this total makes it gross. Now, if I want to find out the progress of the country, I need to have a look at the net aspect. Now, for the net concept, I need to deduct this allowance that I make as a producer for wear and tear, for replacement of the existing fixed assets. So from gross, when I deduct depreciation, I get net. Is that clear to all? Is there any doubt here? Are you all comfortable?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, all right.
Yes, ma'am.
All right, thank you. Now, next we move to domestic product, and here we have national product. Now, when we look at gross domestic product, domestic is that, could you all please mute yourself? Yeah, thank you. So when we say domestic product, we are looking at all the goods and services which are being produced within the domestic territory of the country. Now, domestic territory means the area within the political frontiers of the country or the geographical frontier of the country. So whatever goods are being produced or whatever income is being generated within this domestic or political frontier of the country, that is domestic. Now, there are certain additions and subtractions we make. So whatever income is generated within the domestic territory by the military establishments of the foreign countries or the foreign embassies, that is not a part of our domestic territory. Similarly, what we add is Indian embassies abroad, Indian military establishments abroad, that is a part of our domestic territory, right? So all these adjustments made, whatever income is generated within the domestic territory of the country is a part of our gross domestic product. Next, when we look at the net national product, we are looking at what is the income generated by the normal residents of the country. So that means the criteria itself is different. When we look at domestic product, it is within the domestic territory of the country. When we look at national product, it is on the basis of the income generated by the normal residents of the country. Now, who is a normal resident? Any individual who's been living in the country for more than a year and whose economic interest lies in the country. So economic interest means that his economic activity of production, his consumption, as well as income disposition, that is his expenditure, is being incurred in the country itself. So any such individual is treated as a normal resident, right? So that means when we have calculated national income, that means I have taken into account all the normal residents of the country, whether they are located abroad or whether they are operating within the country. To this, I need to make certain adjustments so that I can get the domestic product. So what do I do in order to get the domestic product? I deduct income of all those who are operating, who are not in the domestic territory, who are normal residents, but have not been operating in the domestic territory of the country, right? And I add those so we add the income of those who are operating in the domestic territory and are not the residents of the country, and I subtract the income of those who are normal residents but are not within the domestic territory of the country. So when I make these adjustments from national, I get domestic. Does that make sense to all?
Ma'am, could you please repeat once?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, all right. So let us take it. Say suppose I am
No,
calculating.
ma'am.
Okay.
And request you to repeat this particular
Yes,
cell.
I'll do that. I'll do that. Say suppose I'm calculating domestic income. So in domestic income, I've taken into account the income generated by the MNCs also. Now, MNCs are not the normal residents because their economic interest lies in their home country. So let us take Coca-Cola also and McDonald's also and all these MNCs that are operating in our country. They are not the normal residents of the country, right? But they are operating within the domestic territory of the country. So when we calculate domestic product, we take into account the income generated by all the producers within the domestic territory, whether they are non-residents or whether they are normal residents of the country. Is this clear so far?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah.
Yes.
So
Yes,
this
ma'am.
is,
Yes,
this
ma'am.
is,
Yes,
yeah.
ma'am.
All right. So this is domestic product. Now, when I want to calculate national income, I have to look at the income generated by the normal residents of the country, right? Now, in this domestic product, I have not included the income generated by maybe State Bank of India, which is located in England, or maybe Reliance, which is operating in Australia, because they are not operating within the domestic territory. But since they're normal residents, I need to include their income. Correct or not? Yes?
Yes.
Right? So that means to
Yes, ma'am.
domestic product, yeah. So what I do is to this domestic product, I add the income of the normal residents that is flowing from abroad. All right. So that is called factor income from abroad. What I need to deduct is the profit generated by the non-residents who we have added in the domestic product because they have been operating within the domestic territory. So I need to deduct the profits of all these MNCs because it is going to flow abroad to their home country. So that means to get national from domestic, what I'm doing is from domestic, I'm deducting the factor income to abroad and I'm adding factor income from abroad. So that means domestic plus net factor income from abroad gives me national. Is this clear now? Is it better? Is it better?
Yes.
All right. Okay. So,
Yes, ma'am.
all right. So this means we have calculated, we have got gross domestic product. Now, another thing that we need to take care is when we're calculating national income, we do not take into account the indirect taxes that are imposed by government. Why do not we take the indirect taxes? Because tax is something for which there has been no corresponding flow of goods and services. It is just one-sided payment. So that is why when we say GDP MP, we are calculating gross domestic product at market price. To arrive at national income, we want to get the pure value of the product, which has to be just the contribution of the four factors of production. So from market price, that means, say, suppose I produce a product, this is worth 10 rupees. In this product, I have included the cost that I have to, I have included the entire cost of production. That is whatever rent I pay, whatever wage I pay. So per unit, the pure cost of production that has gone into this product, say suppose X, is 10 rupees. Now, when I sell it in the market, it may either fetch a higher price because of the indirect tax imposed by government. So when I sell it in the market, it becomes 12 rupees. Or if government gives a subsidy to me, that means covers a part of my cost of production, the price may go down and it may be, I'll be able to sell it in the market maybe for 8 rupees, right? So in order to, so when we are calculating national income, we have to take it in its pure value. So what we do is from market price, we make this readjustment where we deduct the indirect tax and add the subsidy so as to get the pure value, which is called the factor cost. So this gives us the conversion from gross domestic product at market price to net national product at factor cost. To sum it up, that means that gross domestic product at market price is a very comprehensive term where we are including depreciation also, where we are including the non-residents as well as the normal residents who are operating within the domestic territory, and we are including the taxes imposed by government also. So in order to get a more genuine picture, we calculate net national product at factor cost, where we deduct depreciation also, where we find out what is the exclusive contribution of only the normal residents of the country, and we deduct the indirect taxes, we nullify the effect of indirect tax as well as subsidy, so that we get a pure picture of how much our country is generating. Is that better? Is it clear to all?
Excuse me, ma'am.
Yes, sir.
One question.
Yes, sir.
Is agricultural product is also included to calculate
sir.
GDP?
Yes, yes, sir. I'll move to the next slide. That will give you a better idea as to how it is calculated. Now, okay. So let me again. So when we calculate national income, there are actually three economic activities that are taking place in an economy, and all these three activities are interrelated. Now, what are these three activities? So whenever there is production means you're generating employment opportunities. So production leads to income generation, right? Now, whenever there is income generation, with this income or purchasing power that we've got, we are going to create demand for goods and services. So that means income generation leads to expenditure. Expenditure means when we are creating demand for goods, that will lead to further production. So this is called the circular the circular flow of income that is happening, right? So that means production leads to income generation leads to expenditure, and expenditure leads to production. So that means we can calculate national income by product method, income method, and expenditure method, and the value of national income that you get through all these three methods will also be same. So just having a look at this. So when we calculate by product method, we calculate what is the exclusive contribution of primary sector, that is, as you said, the agriculture sector. What is the primary contribution of the manufacturing sector, which is the secondary sector, and what is the contribution of the service sector? When we add the exclusive contribution of all these, we get GDP MP by product method. In income method, we find out what is the income generated in the form of rent, wage, interest, and profit by the normal residents of the country. So we take a comprehensive term. Instead of calling it just wages, we take compensation of employees, where we take into account also the compensation received in cash as well as in kind. Then we have the mixed income of self-employed, which is essentially very important for a country like India, which has got a huge unorganized sector and where proper accounts are not maintained. So there we take the lump sum income earned by them, which is called the mixed income. And then we take the operating surplus, that is the rent, the income earned by the normal residents in the form of rent, interest, and profit. So that is by income method. Last is expenditure method. That is, what is the expenditure incurred on the domestically produced goods from all the sectors? That is, what is the expenditure incurred by the household sectors, which is us who save, who earn income, who save and then spend on goods. So what is the expenditure incurred by the households in the form of consumption expenditure? What is the expenditure incurred by producers on investment? What is the expenditure incurred by government and by the rest of the world sector on the Indian exports? All these together gives us national income by expenditure method. Is it clear? Does that answer your query?
Ma'am, I have a
Yes, sir.
query. Like,
Yes.
yeah, ma'am, I have a query. Like, these three methods we are using in a real factor basis or just for like a theory basis?
No,
Yes, I
sir,
wanted to know.
no, sir. So in our country, we do not make much use of the expenditure method because of the difficulties in getting data. So in our country, we basically make use of the product method, and it is done in practice. It is the CSO, that is Central Statistical Organization, that collects data, and then they calculate national income by product method as well as by income methods. It is very much in practice, and methods are being devised so as to improve the quality of data collection so that we get a clear picture and a more genuine picture. The first attempt of calculating national income, it was done by Dadabhai Naroji, but it was not very scientific. The first scientific attempt was made by V.K.R.B. Rao, and there he divided the entire economy, the entire producing sector, into two. That was, one was the agricultural sector and second was the corporate sector, right? But now we have this entire CSO that calculates, collects data and estimates national income every year. So it is very much in practice, sir. Yeah. Next, we come to infrastructural development in India. If we want to develop our country, we need to invest heavily in infrastructure, and looking at the developments that are taking place in our country in every budget, government is allocating a huge amount. And it was last year that government had announced the National Infrastructure Pipeline, where government plans to invest 100 lakh crore in infrastructural development, and various areas are being covered. So we have water supply and sewerage also, we have roadways also, we have shipping also, ports are being developed, industrial corridors are being developed. So India is focusing a lot on infrastructural development. Now, in order to finance, obviously we need money. So one, as we can see here, is through capital market participation, that is raising loans from the capital market. So in this budget also, government has showed that government is going to raise funds for, which are called the green bonds. That is, government is now looking at investing in environment friendly infrastructure, and for that, the funds that are required, government is going to raise it with the help of green bonds. That's in the international capital market also, government is aiming at raising raising capital. Then commercial banks have played an important role in providing funds for financing infrastructure. Along with that, till the IBRD was formed, that is Institution for what is it called? The Reconstruction and Development. I'll get back to this again. So the board for I'm losing it right now. Yeah, sorry. So this IBRD was formed where it was seen that government is spending a lot on development also, non-developmental expenditure also, which was leading to a deficit. And that is why it was decided that the entire responsibility will not be on public, and that is why private sector participation was sought. So private participation is called the PPP project, that is public-private participation. So in public-private participation, there are various models that we have adopted. So one is your BuildOperate Transfer. So BuildOperate Transfer is where the private sector, with approval from government, it funds the project, it operates the project. For example, if it is your the National Highway NHDP, that is your National Highway Development Project, it was based on BOT. So then through tolls, when the entire revenue or the entire cost is recovered, then the ownership is transferred to the government. So that is called BOT. Then another is Operate, Maintain and Transfer. Operate, Maintain, Transfer model is where the ownership is with the government. It is just on contract basis that it is given to the private sector, and the ownership, then again it is transferred to the government sector. So that is OMT model. Getting back to where I lost the term, it was after your Fiscal Responsibility and Budget Management Act of 2003 that we started with public-private partnership. So Fiscal Responsibility Act and Budget Management means that since the government expenditure was way higher than the government revenue, the fiscal deficit, that is the shortfall, was increasing, and that is why it was decided that private participation would be sought in order to finance infrastructural requirements. So this is about infrastructural development. I'll come to this article later if we are left with time. So we are done with the second module. Any doubts so far? Is there any doubt?
No, ma'am.
Okay.
No, ma'am.
All right. Ashna ma'am, can we have the second poll, please? Which one of the following will not be included in national income? Profits earned by Reliance in Dubai. So what we need to remember is that national income is, we have to find out whether it is normal resident or not, or whether the expenditure is on maintenance, or whether it is a fixed asset. All these things that we just discussed, we need to keep in mind when we are selecting the correct answer. Okay, so here I think there is slight confusion. So it is that which will, is it still going on? Okay, so we are done with it. All right, so it is, the question is which will not be included. So let us see the first option, profits earned by Reliance. Now Reliance is a normal resident because the company is an Indian company, and the economic interest of the company also lies in India. So this one is wrong. Second is salaries earned by Indian employees in PepsiCo. Now Indian employees means they're also normal residents. So their salary will also be included in national income. Third is government expenditure is again on infrastructural development, is a part of national income. What we are left with is the expenditure on maintenance of machinery and building. This is a part of the depreciation, as we discussed, that when we do gross, we take into account the expenditure on new productive capacity as well as the maintenance of existing ones. So this expenditure on maintenance of machinery and building is a part of depreciation that we need to deduct in order to calculate national income. Is that clear? Is that clear?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, all right.
Yes, ma'am.
So moving to the third module is Indian agriculture, and India has been called primarily an agricultural economy. So India has been primarily called an agricultural economy. Why do we call India an agricultural economy? Because 60% of the population is dependent indirectly or directly on livelihood, dependent on agriculture for its livelihood. But unfortunately, the contribution of agriculture to GDP is just 18%. That means, and as I said, that it has just recently risen to 20%. Now, measures have been taken by the government in order to increase the agricultural productivity. So as we can see, one is land reforms. So as we discussed in the first set of slides, that just when we had colonial rule in our country, there was zamindari system or rayatwari system. These were prevalent in the country. So obviously we had to bring about a wave of land reforms so that the actual tillers of the soil could get ownership. And that is why we had land sealing, then we had land consolidation measures. So land sealing means an upper limit of the land was fixed that could be owned by an individual. Any amount of land excess of that ceiling was then taken away by government, and then it was redistributed amongst the landless farmers. This was the land ceiling that was passed. Second was your land consolidation. That means there could be farmers who have different plots of land in spread across the village. Now, obviously, since the plots of these lands are fragmented and small, therefore the productivity is less. So that is why what government started doing is government would consolidate all these fragmented pieces of land, and in compensation would give a consolidated plot of land to the farmer, so that it becomes for him also an economic land holding and it becomes productive for him. that is land consolidation. So these measures have been taken by government so as to increase agriculture productivity. Then government also tries to provide security to the tenants, because there are many tenants who are not the permanent tenants. They do not have tenancy rights. So obviously they can be thrown away by the landlords as and when they want. That is why providing security of tenancy is another legislation that is passed by the government. Coming to technological reforms, Green Revolution is the biggest example, where we started using high-yielding varieties of seeds and more inputs of irrigation, and all these were used in order to increase the productivity. So that comes to technological. NABARD and the next set of topics we are going to take in the forthcoming, the next set of slides. So as we just discussed, in legislation passed, it was the abolition of intermediaries. That is, zamindari system was completely done away with. Then rent regulation, as I said, for the temporary tenants, security of tenancy was very important. So security of tenancy and rent regulation, sealing of land holdings, consolidation of land holdings, and encouraging cooperative farming. Encouraging cooperative farming is the small farmers, they can come together, they can pool in the resources, and with that they can undertake production, so that when they get in all their limited resources, it is sufficient for all of them to undertake production together. So that is the basic idea behind cooperative farming. Coming to cost and product pricing, we have CACP, that is Commission of Agricultural Cost and Prices, that is CACP. It is on the basis of recommendation of this Commission of Agricultural Cost and Prices that the minimum support price is fixed. Now, in this minimum support price, how they fix it is that first they calculate what is the total cost incurred by a farmer. Now, this does not only mean the cost of or the payments which are made to the external sources of production, but also the cost of the factors of production owned by the producer himself, right? So that all these things, they are taken together and the cost is calculated. And then how do we get the minimum support price is the cost plus half of again the cost, so that the farmers get a higher price and get a margin with which they can improvise on the production techniques. So that is the mechanism of fixing the minimum support price. But again, while calculating and fixing the minimum support price, care is taken regarding the international prices of the same products. Second, what extent it is going to affect the cost of living, to what extent it is going to affect the price level of various goods and services. So all these things are taken into account while the MSP is decided. Next comes agricultural marketing. So in agricultural marketing means various processes related to your processing and grading and packaging of the agricultural products. How it is reaching the ultimate users is all about agricultural marketing. So in marketing system, when we look at the farmers, there could be either they have various options. It could be direct sale in the villages, which could be through the mahajans and money lenders, where again, there is a great scope of exploitation, or the mobile traders of urban areas. Next is where you have the regulated market, where you get a guaranteed price for your product. So these are various ways. So now government is trying to make the markets more regulated, and they're being provided with the storage facility also. Infrastructural support is being provided so that they get a fair price for their produce. Now coming to NABARD. So NABARD is it was set up in the year 1982, and the main objective of NABARD is to provide refinance facility to the various banks or financial institutions which are into provision of credit or loans to the farmers. So NABARD stands for National Bank for Agricultural and Rural Development. And again, to repeat, it was set up in the year 1982. So the main function of NABARD, so NABARD does not provide loans directly to the farmers. It provides financial support, technical support to the institutions which are engaged in providing credit facilities to the farmers. So first is obviously, as I said, credit facilities. So it provides short-term loans, long-term loans to the regional rural banks, to the commercial banks which are into provision of loans to farmers, to the cooperative credit societies. Second, it also supports promotion of various agricultural development, rural development. We have a Rural Infrastructural Development Fund, which is called the RIDF, which provides financial support to construction of rural roads, watershed development. So various promotional projects are undertaken by and financed by. That is promotional function of NABARD. Next is supervisory function. Supervisory function is all the financial institutions, they are under the supervision of NABARD. So various rules and regulations are laid down. The employees in all these financial institutions, the management, they are imparted training so that they are very well aware of the priorities of NABARD, the rules and regulations, and the various functioning of these financial institutions are in sync with the objectives of NABARD. So that is the supervisory function. They also provide assistance to the government, to the NGOs, be it technical assistance, be it financial assistance in executing various projects which are meant for rural development. So that is about NABARD. Now, last we come to agriculture and World Trade Organization. So World Trade Organization was the predecessor of World Trade Organization was General Agreement on Trade and Tariff, which was immediately formed after World War II, I think in the year 1948. But there were many rounds of conferences and many agreements that were signed between various countries. And the objective was now to provide a fair level field to the developed countries as well as the developing countries, and to encourage the developing countries to participate more in world trade. So in 1995, when WTO was formed, that is the World Trade Organization was formed, it was a recommendation was made that the developed countries will reduce the support to their producers, as well as the developing countries will also reduce their support. Now, why the support is to be reduced is, say, suppose we have these developed countries which have got huge resources. So they can obviously cover a greater cost of production of their domestic producers, which will enable the domestic producers to sell in the international market at a lower price, which the developing countries cannot do. That means it is not a level field anymore, and the developing countries obviously will be overshadowed and overtaken by the developed countries because of the kind of support the developed countries are providing to their domestic producers. So that is why WTO wanted a commitment from the developed countries as well as the developing countries to first give more market access. That means there should be more of free trade. That means now there can be protectionist policy adopted by the government, which means the government will impose tariff barriers, and which was the case before 1991. In some areas, government used to impose almost 300% tax rate on the goods imported from other countries. So the tariff wall, which means the tariff wall in India was one of the highest before 1991. So therefore, obviously the other countries were not getting access to Indian market. So after the formation of WTO, all the countries, they were requested to reduce all these tariff barriers and provide more access to all these trading countries. So that was the first provision of WTO. Second is domestic support. That is, reduce the domestic support provided by the government in the form of, so even minimum support price has come under the radar by WTO, and they asked that you cannot provide so much of minimum support price to the farmers. And that is when India evoked the Bali Peace Clause, which says that in certain areas, India can have its own discretion, because it's a developing country and it has got its own priorities. That is reducing domestic support. And last is export subsidy. Export subsidy, as I said, is that government covers the cost of production so that the producer is able to sell it in the international market at a lower price. So the WTO wants that such export subsidies should be reduced by the developed as well as developing nations, so that it is the market forces at play and not government interference which is working in the international market. Any doubts so far? Is it clear so far? Any difficulty?
Yes,
Any
ma'am.
doubt?
Yes,
All
ma'am.
right. Okay.
Yes,
All right. Thank you. Ma'am, can we have the next poll question, please? So which one of the following is not a function of NABARD? So we just discussed the functions of NABARD. Which one do you think is not a function of NABARD? I think majority of us have got it right. That is, it is direct lending to farmers, 51%, and that's right because they are into refinancing services. That is, they provide credit facilities to the financial institutions which are into provision of loans to the farmers. So we've got it right. So I think it's safe enough to move to the next set of slides. That is module, it is 4. So we come to industrial sector. So if we look at the industrial sector, its contribution to GDP is not very satisfactory. It is 29%. And further more disappointing is its contribution to employment, which is meager 18%. Right now, various policies have been adopted. So as I said, that just when India got independence, the capital goods industry was completely missing, and Indian industrial sector was, so to say, was practically absent. So that is why government thought, or the national leaders during that time thought that the public sector has to take a lead. One, because the private sector does not have the required resources, or because there is no demand, because obviously the growth rate of the economy was also very low, the per capita income of people was very low, so they could not create a demand for goods, so there was no incentive also for the private producers to produce, so they lacked resources, incentive, and that the objective of private sector is always to make profits and not social welfare. And that is why public sector took lead in industrial development. And that is why we started with IPR, that is Industrial Policy Resolution, which the first one, which was just after independence, that is India 1948. Now, one of the major objectives of this IPR was to promote and expand the SSE, that is the small scale enterprises. And there was a reason behind this. The objective to promote SSE was that these small scale enterprises are one, labor intensive. So this will help in rehabilitating the people who have been thrown out of employment, or because of destruction of handicraft industries, they do not have any means of livelihood, or the landless farmers. So all of them can get absorbed in these small scale enterprises. So priority was given to these small scale enterprises. Second is that, so there were certain industries which were exclusively reserved for these small scale enterprises. Now, all these aspects, we are going to have a look at it in the next set of slides. So as I said, the industrial policy reforms of 1948, we can see that the development of SSI to rehabilitate people, and there were 4 categories of industries. In 56, we can see that there were 3 categories of industries. Now, these categories of industries were Schedule A, Schedule B, and Schedule C. Schedule A comprised of your atomic sector, that is nuclear energy, then defense and railways, which were completely in public domain and completely under the ownership of government. Then second schedule was again would be predominantly public sector, but if there were industries which were already owned by private sector, they would be allowed to operate. So your iron and steel, shipping, all these came under the second schedule. Third was your paper industry, textiles, or the automobile sector. They came in the third category. Then this also, the private sector had to take or obtain a license in order to operate, right? So the entire private sector was regulated by IDRA, that is Industrial Development Regulation Act, and they had to obtain a license. So the government would fix how much quantity would be produced. Government would fix at what price it would be sold in the market, whether capacity building can be done further or not, the location of industry, everything was fixed by the government. That means private sector was under strict regulation. Then we can see that as we proceed from 48 to 77 and 80, we can see that the number of items that were reserved for the small scale industry sector was expanding, right? Because they wanted more incentives to be given to the small scale industries. But again, towards 1990, we see that there were certain revisions made in the policy and certain steps were taken to liberalize the private sector. For example, we can see 1990, there were revision in the investment limits. Then Small Scale Industry Development Bank of India was set up in 1990, again to look at the finance requirement of the... Could you please mute yourself, please?
Unmute, please.
We can see that in the 80s and 90s, there have been revisions in the IPR, so as to liberalize the various regulations that were imposed on the private sector. Right now, if we have time, I don't know whether time will permit us, but I would definitely recommend all of you to go through this experience that was shared by Gurucharan Das. And there is this entire set of videos on India before 91. And he says how there was Rahul Bajaj was put behind bars because he had crossed the limit of producing the number of scooters. And that is why, if you remember, that we had all these long waiting, we had to wait for months to get a delivery of a scooter or maybe a telephone line or maybe a car, because there were limits on the production of units in the country. So he talks about what were the various unreasonable restrictions put on private sector by the government through the IPR. And that is again one of the reasons why the industrial sector has not picked up at the pace as it should have been. Now, another act that was introduced was in the year 1969, which is called the MRTP Act. Now, while this IPR was being implemented, it was realized that because of the licensing, the influential producers, they were able to obtain more licenses, and that is why the production was getting concentrated in few hands. That means monopolies were growing. Monopolies means that sole or single producer in the market, and obviously if you rule the market, then you have control over price also, you have control over supply also, and that means social welfare is at stake. So in order to take care of this problem, MRTP Act was introduced. So how would you define or identify an monopoly? Any company with an asset worth 20 crore, then it was revised to 2,500 and so on. So the asset limit was revised from time to time so as to match the requirements or the development of the country and the production. So monopoly was initially, it was defined as any company with an asset worth 20 crore or 1/3 of total supply. So that was how monopoly was defined. Then various measures were taken to keep a check on monopolistic trade practices. That is, whether the producers are deliberately hoarding the goods, reducing the supply, creating a scarcity, and then selling it at a higher price or not. So government used to keep a check on such practices. And third is restrictive trade practices were put at check. That means there is always this tendency that if there are few producers, they can come together, act as a monopoly. That is, they form a cartel. So they collectively control the entire. Could you please mute yourself, sir? So there is this tendency that few producers, they can come together, they form a cartel and reduce the supply in the market, create a scarcity, and then sell it at a higher price. So which leads to exploitation of consumers. So in order to keep a check on this, MRTP Act was passed. Again, MRTP was not that effective, and that is why it was done away with. And the year 2001, we started with the Competition Act was introduced. Competition Act was more liberal. So it was not that they would keep a check on the expansion of firms, but they would keep a check on whether the firms are trying to act as a monopoly and not letting other producers enter. So that was the Competition Act. Another thing was the Foreign Exchange Regulation Act, which was again very restrictive in nature. This was again in 1973 during under the prime ministership of Srimati Indira Gandhi, because what was realized that time was India's heavy dependence on foreign imports for meeting even the basic requirements. Therefore, government felt that the valuable foreign exchange reserves were depleting, and there was a need to keep a check on the outflow of foreign currency. Therefore, FERA was implemented and put into force. The investment of capital had its own restrictions that time. So any foreign investment or foreign company could operate with 60% equity of the Indian company. So there, the limit of foreign capital would be confined to 40%. Where it was allowed till 74% was in core industries, that is whether it is power or whether it is iron and steel. So in such heavy investment industries, the limit was greater. Obviously, this FERA did not cover the IT services, and also the MNCs. When after 1991, when the MNC started to enter the country, there was flow of capital from the country in the form of profits, the MNC started using Indian resources, and there was outflow of resources from the country in the form of profits. So in order to meet this growing requirement of regulating the MNCs, FEMA was brought into action. FERA was done away with. So every transaction which involves foreign exchange is regulated by RBI, but it is not that we need RBI approval. So it is regulated by RBI, wherever RBI feels that there is something which is going against the interest of the nation, there they can act. Otherwise, there is no such approval that is required, which was required in case of FERA. So we are done with module 4. Any doubts so far in module 4 in the industrial sector?
No.
All right.
No,
Ma'am, can we have the poll, please?
No, ma'am.
All right, thank you. Which act was passed to make regulation of foreign exchange transactions better compliant with liberalization? That is, better compliant with more foreign investment taking place, more private sector operating. Which act was passed? Now, when we are saying foreign exchange, obviously it has to be with the foreign exchange transactions. Can we have slightly more participation? It has just risen to 79%, so that we can close it fast then once we get more people responding to this question. So I think we're done. 80% of people have already responded, and we've got the answer right. Although the next option that 33% people have opted for is FERA, which is, again, as I said, that FERA was not compliant with liberalization because the MNCs were taking advantage of the loopholes in FERA, and that is why FEMA was implemented and brought into action, which was, as asked in the question, better complied with liberalization. So we are done with this question. Next, we move to services. So service sector is a very important sector, and more than 50% of the GDP, there's I think close to 60% that the contribution of service sector is the highest. But unfortunately, if we look at the employment generation by the service sector, it is close to 25%. That means it is not very satisfactory. So that we see that a major part of GDP is being contributed by service sector. But when it comes to contribution to employment generation, it is not that satisfactory. First, when we say service sector, what are the areas that are covered? So hospitality, hospitality, then your tourism, education, health, then real estate, all these railways, all these are a part of the service sector. Banking, finance, all these are a part of service sector. Now, how do we differentiate between goods and services? So goods, because goods come under the manufacturing sector. So we need to know how can we differentiate between the goods and the service sector. So first is tangibility. Service is something which is intangible. That is, it cannot be touched, felt, or it cannot be seen. We can experience the service that is being rendered, but it is something that cannot be touched or felt. Unlike service, goods are something which are tangible. That is, you can see, touch the good, you can feel the good. Second is transfer of ownership. Here, when a good is sold to you, you get the good, you get the ownership of good. In case of services, it is when a person is rendering a service, you're enjoying that service or you're experiencing that service, but you do not get ownership of service. That means in case of services, transfer of ownership is not possible. Possibility of return, since in case of goods, once it is sold, there is a tangible that is getting transferred, and the consumption may take place later on. Therefore, it can be returned. In case of service, production and consumption is taking place at the same time. Therefore, you cannot return it. Importance of time. In case of services, the importance of time is more. For example, in case of health, it is more of time is more important than any delivery of a good. So time is more important in case, although it is important in both the cases, but in case of services, time holds more importance. Last is evaluation. Now, I, as a service render, may render the same service at different point in time in a different manner, right? Because it is something based on human capacity or human skill. So evaluation of service is difficult. While in case of goods, a uniform or a homogeneous good is being produced by the machines or by an individual, and therefore evaluation becomes easier in case of tangible goods. So these are the various characteristic features on the basis of which we can differentiate between goods and services. Now, when we trace the economic history of any country, especially the developed nations, what has been seen is that when it comes to contribution to GDP, there is first the primary sector that contributes the maximum. Then the focus shifts to manufacturing sector. So from primary sector, it is the manufacturing sector that starts contributing more to the GDP. And finally, it comes to the growth of service sector, which then overtakes all the other sectors. In our country, it has been directly from primary sector to service sector, with the manufacturing sector not recording much growth or development. So if we take this graphical representation and make a comparison between India and China, why we have taken India and China is because India and China started their progress or their path of development or process of development around the same time. That is why what we see is that China has overtaken India, as in by leaps and bounds. And if we see, so here the green curve is showing agriculture, while blue is showing industry and yellow is showing services. So the contribution of agriculture was around 1950. The reference period here is 1950 because that is the time when we started with our planning. So it was slightly over 50%, and there has been a consistent fall, and it has come down to 14%. That is the contribution to GDP. When we see the industries, there has not been a significant change. It was almost 17% at 1950, and now it has come slightly around 27% that we can see here. 27% is the contribution of industry to GDP. Service sector, especially after 1991, has recorded a sharp rise. So it was around 30% and it has gone up to 59% of GDP. That means it is directly from agriculture, we have directly jumped to service sector. In case of China, what we observe is that agriculture, there has been a consistent fall, but it is not a very drastic fall. It has from slightly over 20%, it has gone to 10%. Industry has remained always higher than service sector, and it is only around 2013 that industry and service sector match around 45%. So that means we have been an exception when it comes to economic history we have skipped the phase where manufacturing sector contributes, and that is somewhere we are lagging behind. Growth and challenges. When we look at the growth, government reforms have helped the transparency, the various facilitation in investment procedures that has helped in more investment in service sector and expansion of service sector. We have cheap and skilled workforce as compared to developed nations or the high and middle income countries. The wage rates in our country is slightly less, and that is why it is an attractive destination for even the foreign direct investment, because we are getting a pool of skilled workforce. We are very comfortable with English, which is sort of official language across the globe. And we have a large youth population, which is one of the strengths that we need to make use of. Challenges are rigid. The government regulations are still very rigid. There could be resistance from the government. There could be resistance from the opposition to the government. There could be resistance from the various communities when it comes to investments. Second is there has been lopsided growth. Certain sectors have recorded higher growth. Certain sectors have remained neglected. So for example, service sector or IT sector, it has recorded very high growth. When it comes to education or health, the growth rate is slightly slow. We are facing stiff competition from many other countries which are in the same bracket. So Vietnam, Bangladesh, all these countries are giving us a stiff competition. Failure to generate employment opportunities, as we saw that 60% of GDP is being contributed by service sector, but it has been a jobless growth because the employment opportunities remains around 25 to 26%. So that is another challenge that we have faced. Any difficulty in service sector?
No, ma'am.
No, ma'am.
All right.
No, ma'am.
Ma'am, can we have the next poll, please? What has been the pattern of growth in India with regards to sectoral contribution to GDP? Is it primary to secondary to tertiary, or is it primary to secondary, or is it primary to tertiary, or still primary contributes the highest? What has been the trajectory like in India? Still 60% have only participated. Can we have a quick response to this question? So I think we have got the first option, that is primary to secondary to tertiary, which is actually not correct, because as I said, and we just had a look at the graph also, that we've jumped directly from primary sector to tertiary sector. So the correct answer is option C, that is primary to tertiary. So that means we have completely skipped where there is a higher contribution from primary sector, it shifts to secondary sector, the manufacturing sector, and we have directly jumped to tertiary sector. Our last module is on population and economic development, and we need to analyze population because India is the second most populous country in the world, and maybe by 2025 we may overtake China also. So population, the question now arises, how do we convert this population into human capital? Instead of treating as a liability, how can we convert it into an asset like China has done? So how can we bring about skill development, generate more jobs so that this population, which is going to contribute to labor force as well, can contribute in the process of economic development? Now, various theories have been given related to population, the treatment of population by various economists. So there was this economist called Malthus, Robert Malthus. Now, Malthus had a very pessimistic approach towards population. So what he said is that population grows in multiples. That is, there is geometric progression in case of population, and it doubles itself in every 25 years. Well, in case of agricultural production of food grains, it increases in arithmetic progression. So that means if population is not kept under control and measures are not taken to keep population growth within limits, then there can be food scarcity, acute food scarcity and famine in a country. So he had a very pessimistic approach, and that is why he wanted that the population should be kept within limits. That is Malthusian theory. Next is optimum theory. Optimum theory says that we need an optimum size of population to harness the prospects of growth and development. So that is, if say suppose we have 10 resources and only 5 people, then we cannot make full utilization of 10 resources. So maybe 20 people are required for 10 resources, and that is where the optimum combination is there. So if we have population less than 20, it is a problem, because then we are not progressing at the pace that we can. If it is going beyond 20, again it is a problem, because then you're putting too much of pressure on the existing resources. So optimum theory says that there is an optimum size that we need to stick to. Last is demographic transition. So demographic transition means that the entire population growth is studied, and then it is divided into different stages. So in the first stage of transition, there is high birth rate and high death rate. So if there is high birth rate and high death rate, the growth rate of population is very low. Second stage is where the birth rate comes down, but the death rate comes down because of more awareness amongst people, because of improvement in standard of living, because of expansion of opportunities of earning income. So that leads to fall in death rate, but the birth rate remains high. So this is the stage where the population increases at a very fast rate. Then the third stage, where both birth rate and death rate come down, and that is where the growth rate of population starts to fall. Now let us have a look at the demographic stages of our country. So the stages of demographic transition in India, we see that from 1901 to 1921, we were in the first stage. So birth rate is shown by the blue line, while death rate is shown by the yellow line. And at 1921 is said to be the year of great demographic divide. Why? Because this was a year when the population growth rate of India had actually become negative. That is why it is said to be the year of sorry. So this is said to be the year of Great Divide, 1921. Then 1921 to 1951, we see that there has been, the death rate has been falling sharply, and the birth rate also, there is a steady decline. Further, we see that between 1951, so 1951 is the year when we started with the 5-year plans. So because of better provision of health facilities, living standards improving, we see that the gap between birth rate and death rate is maximum in the year 1951. And this is when the growth rate rose to 2.1%. So there was, so this was the year of population explosion, or this was the range when we had the population explosion. Since 1981, we see that there has been a steady decline in the birth rate also, and the death rate also has been falling. And now the growth, the rate at which population is growing is 1.6%. Now we come to this demographic dividend. This is an article which shows, because we have been claiming that we will be the next superpower, because we have, age is at our, age is in our favor, because in most of the developed countries, the population is aging. Most of the people are getting into the bracket of dependent population, right? So we say that it is going to be in our favor, because we have this population where the average age of people is going to be 32, that is in the prime working age. Now, actually, is this demographic dividend a disaster? Or is it actually going to, can we actually make it an opportunity for us? So in the first section, we see that the projected population in 2030, for India, it is going to be 1,461 million. China, it is going to be lower, that is 1,391 million, while US, it is very low, 366 million. Looking to the second quadrant, what we see here, labor force surplus or deficit. So India is going to have a surplus of 47 million. China, that is why China is also taking measures to expand its population so that it can add to the labor force. But China, by 2030, it says that they're going to have a labor force deficit of 10 million, while US, it is going to have a deficit of 17 million. So India is the country which is going to have a surplus. More like an icing on cake is that India is going to have a median age, that is an average age of 32, that is the youngest of all. China 43 and US 39. Sorry, but the challenging part is that the economic prospects, when we see, that is the growth rate in India is going to be 6.7%. And the real GDP of India is the lowest. That is, it is $13,420 billion, the lowest. In China, it is going to be $34,732 billion, while for US, it is going to be $22,234 billion. So we can see here a mismatch, that is, the growth rate is higher, but the number of jobs being generated is lower. That means, again, there is a supply-demand gap. The supply of labor force is going to be high, and the demand for labor is going to be low, because the growth rate is not matching the rate at which the population is growing. So the need of R is to equip the people with more skills, so at least the existing jobs can be used up by or existing jobs can generate employment opportunities for the labor force. Now, I'll give you an example. This was an article that came in the Tribune. So I won't read the entire thing. I'll just read the highlighted parts. So India, economists like to excite about India's huge demographic dividend, that it has got the youngest workforce between the age of 15 and 64. But actually, is it an impending danger? Because what we have been experiencing is jobless growth. So a good example of this jobless growth is a multi-billion-dollar oil and gas refinery at Jamnagar on West Coast with a capacity of 1.24 million barrels per day. So it is the world's largest single refining complex. Now the number of people that it absorbs is 2,500 people. And in that also, many of them are just gardeners. So that means they're not even contributing majorly to the production process. So only 1.20 million will have skills. So this labor force that we're talking about, are they actually skilled to get absorbed? So only 1.20 million of them are actually employable and capable to join the manufacturing sector. So what the need of the hour is to equip the population with required skills so that they can get absorbed in the manufacturing sector or in the service sector. So on that note, I would like to conclude my presentation. Is there any doubt?
No, ma'am.
All right.
No, ma'am.
Ma'am, in the previous slide, there was this mention of CAGR, CAGR.
Yes.
What is that?
Growth rate. CA, I cannot recollect right now, but GR is your growth rate. It is something, I think, compound aggregate growth rate or something it is there, right?
Okay.
But GR stands for growth rate, yeah. Or it is cumulative growth rate. I need to check, but GR stands for growth rate. Yeah. Ma'am, can we have the last poll, please?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am. So what is the second stage of demographic transition characterized with? Just a hint, second stage means where there is population explosion. So I think majority has responded and they've given stable birth rate and fall in death rate, which is right, and which actually leads to this population explosion. So thank you so much for being so patient, and I hope I've been able to clear all your doubts. In case you still have any doubt, you can always email me. And it was nice interacting with all of you. Yes, yes, ma'am.
Where can I watch recorded lectures?
Ashna ma'am will be clearing all your doubts. I think it will
Yeah.
be, yes, ma'am.
Okay, so good evening, students. Any academic related doubts, if you have right now, you can directly ask her, ma'am. But any administrative query, I would request you to kindly raise the ticket to the Canvas department. Okay. So thank you so much, Sumedha, ma'am, for this wonderful session. And there are some survey polls, students, for regarding the session. I would just request you to kindly wait for 5 minutes. I'll just launch it, and that would be great if you give us the feedback regarding the session. Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes. So I have launched the survey polls. Kindly give your session feedback.
Arvind sir has replied for all of us, that is CAGR stands for compound annual growth rate. Thank you so much, sir.
Okay, so I am done with the survey poll. So thank you so much, students, for giving your feedback. We'll definitely meet in next session. And thank you so much, ma'am, for the session.
Thank you, ma'am.
Yeah.
Ma'am, when will the timetable
Thank
for
you,
our
ma'am.
next conversation come?
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank
Okay.
you. Thank you so much, all of you.
Yes. Nitin, sir, you had some question?
Yeah, when will the timetable for the next sessions be posted on the
Canvas.
Canvas?
Okay, so sir, as and when it is scheduled, it will be definitely uploaded on Canvas by the department. Okay.
Okay.
Yes. Thank you. So happy weekend, everyone, and happy Gudi Padwa. Take care. Bye.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you,
Thank
ma'am.
you. Happy
Bye.
Gudi Padwa.
Yes. Bye. Bye.
Thank you, ma'am.